powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, we're live today at the Chickies and Pete's location in Atlantic City at the Tropicana. Mike and Pete, Carl and Cape May. Congratulations, Carl. You are qualified for a chance to win those Eagles, Commanders, Club Box seats, Monday Night Football at the Link. They're playing the Commanders this week in Washington. The tickets we're giving away for the home game in Philly. We'll do another opportunity for you to win this hour on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN. Mike and Pete and Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com as we take a look ahead to the Eagles and Commanders. Andrew always does a great job giving us the breakdown on some of the matchups here. Andrew, Football at 4, welcome back, bud. How are you?
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
All is good, man, and obviously the Eagles came out, looked pretty good on Monday night, and they got to get right back in it on a short week against Washington. So let's start out with some of the things that you're looking at and some of the things that you might be taking a look at, which is the matchups in this game up front. I think that's been really the difference in these games so far is Detroit's offensive line pretty good and the Minnesota line, not so good. Where does Washington's offensive line? I think that really will kind of set the tone for the matchup breakdown here.
Yeah, it sure does, and they can be exposed in the interior, right? I mean, Chase Roulier, their center, he's out. He's placed on injured reserve a couple days ago, so they signed veteran Nick Martin, who was most recently with the Saints. He didn't make their team out of training camp, and he was on their practice squad, and he's a bit of a journeyman, but he's going to be, and I think he's going to be inserted in the starting lineup this week, and that was already a pretty weak interior that also has left guard Andrew Norwell, who was with the Jacksonville Jaguars before that, and Trey Turner as well. So I think that you would like to see the Eagles' interior pass rush really take shape. This is the week to really get them rolling. And I really saw them come alive against the Vikings, which you really wanted to see. Not to the level that I expected, but the pass rush was a lot more efficient than it was against Detroit. I thought that Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave got a better push. I thought Josh Sweat showed up in a big way. Now, they're not going to regularly, it doesn't seem like they're going to regularly be able to get home with a four-man rush, which is kind of problematic given the resources that they invested into the defensive line. But I think if there's a matchup to be won, it's right there in the interior in the trenches, which, as we know, getting pressure in the face of Carson Wentz can really alter the entire landscape of the game.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to start with, by the way, Mike Quick's here. So, Andrew, you're on the pressure here. Mike Quick's sitting here listening to your breakdown, and he's nodding his head with some of the things you say. See, you come to Chickies and Pete's, you see an Eagle Hall of Famer, Mike Quick, sitting here hanging out with the sports bash. But, Andrew, let's look at you. You mentioned I wanted to start with that offensive line. That sets the tone for the game for me. And then that secondary. You know, you got McLaurin, who's really had success against the Eagles, but he hasn't had that big breakout game yet so far. I'm kind of interested in what you saw, the way they stopped Jefferson, and if they can defend this Washington wide receiver core. Dotson's got 3 scores. Logan Thomas is tough. The matchup of the Eagles secondary in this passing game.
Yeah, well, the Eagles secondary is playing at such a high level right now, and they're really starting to really build that continuity, right? I think there was a lot was made about the state of the defense coming out of that Detroit game, and there's just so many different moving parts, and they haven't really played together in a game outside of that one series in the preseason. So I think you're really seeing all the different components and parts come together. They're playing off each other well. Now, they have a tough matchup this week in Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, who has been a red zone weapon for Washington through 2 games, and I think he could be a bit of an X factor this week. But, I mean, there's not a corner in football right now that's playing at a higher level than Darius Slay. So I think, you know, if you're an Eagles fan, you would take Darius Slay in any matchup this season, given what you just saw him do to arguably one of the best, or arguably the top 2 receiver in football. Now, it really is going to come down to pressure, because you don't want to give Carson Wentz too much time back there where he's able to improvise outside of structure or be able to pick apart the secondary, because you can only cover for so long. And they do have a multitude of weapons. We haven't even mentioned Curtis Samuel, who had 77 yards receiving last week, is a multifaceted player that you can get the ball to in space, be it on jet sweeps, dump offs. You can send him deep. He can present a whole multitude of problems. So I think that they do have a pretty deep receiving core, and they're rich with weapons. J.D. McKissick is another good receiving running back that is a guy that you want to get in space, and it's going to really test a guy like a T.J. Edwards, I think. So it's really integral that the Eagles get home, whether they have to send pressure or whatever the case may be. They have to be able to rattle Carson Wentz early, and as we've seen, he's prone to turnovers and to have the old lackadaisical play here and there. So I think that's going to be paramount in the early goings of this game.
Yeah, good stuff here with DiCecco football at 4. And then the running game. This is a team in Washington that has not run the ball with a lot of success. And Philadelphia, did a great job, I thought, against Dalvin Cook last week. So do you think that Washington will find success on the ground this week?
I really don't think so. And there wasn't enough made about the job that the Eagles did. There were so many different storylines coming out of Monday night, but I don't think it was talked about enough how efficient they were against the run and bottling up a guy like Dalvin Cook and forcing the Vikings to become one-dimensional. And frankly, Kirk Cousins was seeing ghosts, and he was pressing as a result. But when you look at what the Washington Commanders have right now from a rushing standpoint, last week I think they carried the ball 20 times, and they had less than 90 yards rushing. And I think it was Antonio Gibson that had the lone rushing touchdown. They don't have the push up front to really to win the battle of the trenches, particularly in the interior. As I've mentioned, they're going to be playing with the reserve center for one, and they're really just not equipped to block up a guy like a Fletcher Cox or a Javon Hargrave or get a Jordan Davis in there. They're just, I think that's where the battle is ultimately going to be won. And I think in time, pretty early in this game, you're going to see the Washington Commanders have to become one-dimensional, which really plays into a guy like a Josh Sweat or Brandon Graham to really pin their ears back and get after the quarterback.
Andrew DiCecco, football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. It's a little look at the Eagles' defense, what they're matched up against. Let's flip the script to the Eagles' offense. They did everything right, man. Right? I don't know that there was anything we can really criticize from Monday night, but for you, where do you attack this Washington defense with this personnel that Philadelphia has? We know they can run. We see that they can now throw the ball. So where's the weak spot for you in the Washington defense?
Well, I still think that I would take advantage of that second level where their linebackers are Jamin Davis, who was a first-round pick last year. He over pursues quite a bit. He's an aggressive, attack-minded player. I think that you can get a guy like Dallas Goedert that can really exploit that second level of the field. Obviously, Jalen Hurts seems to be comfortable in building that cohesiveness with the entire passing to all of his skill players. But I think that Dallas Goedert is going to have a chance to really work the seams and move the chains over the middle and get the offense into a rhythm as a result. And I think that that's the area to really attack in the early goings of this game. Cole Holcomb's another player who formerly from North Carolina, and I think that those two guys, him and Davis, getting those guys in space and making a player like and having a guy like Dallas Goedert really put the stress on them to make some plays in coverage is really the way that I would approach the early portion, the early game script.
How do you think their defensive front stacks up, Andrew? Because I see names I recognize: Montez Sweat, Casey Toohill, Jonathan Allen. You see some of these names, and you think to yourself, like, well, the Eagles' rushing attack, both from Hurts and Miles Sanders, both were effective last week against the Vikings. How do you think it'll be this week against the Commanders?
That's really interesting, and they do have, and it's funny you mentioned Casey Toohill, of course, the former Eagles 7th-round pick from a few seasons ago, who found a role there in a reserve. But I think that the way that the Eagles are playing right now, they're running the ball with a lot of confidence. And we talked about how there wasn't enough made about how the Eagles stopped Dalvin Cook. Well, there also, wasn't enough made about the game that Miles Sanders is having, the start to the season that Miles Sanders is having. He's running with a lot more authority, a lot more power. He's more decisive, and he's running like he's making a statement with each carry and making the most of it. And I think the Eagles are playing with such confidence and and they're in such a rhythm right now that it seems like wherever they're calling, whatever Shane Steichen's calling, they're executing it at a high level. So I don't anticipate them running in any trouble running the football this week. I think they're going to do that early and often. And I think you're going to continue to see a good mix of runs and passes because the Eagles have shown right now that they're able to really execute at a high level. So that's what I would I don't think that they're going to shy away from it just given the matchup.
Andrew DiCecco with us here talking football at 4. Eagles going to the Commanders. And, yeah, I know the balance looks pretty good. How much credit do you give to Steichen, by the way, for his play calling and tailoring that to Hurts? I mean, because not only is the Eagles' offense clicking, but it's almost like that synergy of play call to talent.
Yeah, I think you have to give a lot of credit to Shane Steichen, but you also have to give credit to the offense for executing it, right? I mean, they're getting an early rhythm. They're coming out on fire. They're making an early statement, and they're not letting up. Now, the one thing that I would say, and they didn't let up in the first half. The second half, I think, and when you face better teams, that type of, you can't afford to have your offense stall and maybe take your foot off the gas, and you have to continue to play like the Buffalo Bills did on Monday night as well. You have to continue to play all the way through the game because you can't afford to let up. Teams are going to come back in this league, or all it takes a turnover here or there. I mean, you saw the blocked field goal attempt, how quickly things could have changed, if things went the other way. But I think that Steichen's in a rhythm as a play caller, and he really knows what he has, and he's comfortable with his personnel to be able to carry out the assignments in which he's asking them to do. And, I mean, the Eagles are playing at such a high level right now, it almost looks like it doesn't matter what defense they're facing. They're coming out there with confidence, and they know where to attack, where to go with the football, and how to beat them with scheme and just overall talent.
Earlier you mentioned the Washington secondary. You mentioned maybe some possibilities to exploit their linebackers. That makes me think about Dallas Goedert. That's the quarterback's best friend, right? The big tight end that you can always find. Is it possible that Dallas Goedert could have a big day against that Washington secondary and their linebackers?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I think that would be the way to go if you're looking to get into an early rhythm on offense. I think the game script should feature a heavy dose of Dallas Goedert to, one, get Jalen Hurts in a rhythm. I mean, obviously, having a tight end like that, they can do it all. It's a safety blanket and a good outlet for any quarterback to really build that continuity throughout the game and get those early completions and move the chain. So yeah, Pete, I could easily see 6 to 8 targets for Dallas Goedert. I also think there's going to be an opportunity to really strike that secondary pretty early and often. I mean, they have a guy in Benjamin St-Juste who does have some size. I think he goes about 6'4", former Minnesota cornerback. William Jackson has not worked out. He came over from the Cincinnati Bengals. I think that you can see Devontae Smith carve him up, and I also think that you're going to see A.J. Brown have a pretty big game. And then we saw Quez Watkins make the most of his 2 receptions. He had 2 for 69, of course, that 53-yarder. And I think he's going to factor in heavily into this game plan as well, because the Eagles have such a well-rounded trio of receivers that they can attack a defense in a multitude of ways. And I think you're going to see them all have an impact in this game at various points.
Andrew, John Gannon was asked today about, Slay, Bradbury, Maddox, the kind of play that he gives. Does that lend him to be able to get more creative? Can he do more now, especially in a week like this? Carson Wentz will make mistakes. So do you anticipate more pressure coming because, 1, he trusts his corners more, and 2, he knows, the Eagles should anyway, I know he wasn't a coach here when Wentz was here, but that he is prone to make mistakes and hold on to the ball too long?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great point. I mean, that's the one thing that was my primary takeaway from Jonathan Gannon is just how much trust he has in this configuration of players, that he's really able to call things with so much more flexibility and confidence. When you saw last year, he had to do so many different things to protect a guy like a Steve Nelson on the outside, and he had to be more passive and almost hope for the offense to make a mistake. Now he's able to attack a little bit more, be a little bit more aggressive, and keep offenses on their toes, not knowing what's going to happen. He can be a little bit more creative with his pressure packages, and he can give you different looks on the back end as well. So I think having the perfect 3 corners for what he's looking to do in Bradbury, Slay, and Avonte Maddox, it allows him to do so many different things with how he's able to deploy his pass rushers, like a guy like Hassan Reddick, which I want to see what he's able to do if he's able to sort of get in a role here. So, I mean, yeah, I think that history has shown that if you apply enough pressure on Carson Wentz early, he will force the football into coverage. He will do commit a boneheaded play. Yeah. And I think that's really, it's really shaping up to go that way. And I think that's a testament to the confidence that Jonathan Gannon has in his players to be able to execute what he's asking them to do.
It's funny, Andrew. I mean, if you rip the guy, and a lot of people have ripped Jonathan Gannon, you got to praise him when it works well. And I mean, he did all kinds of zones against the Vikings. He did a regular zone, a soft zone, a press zone, and then after Kirk Cousins had basically seen every look and they were able to change the score in their favor, then the pressure started to get home, including Sweat at the very end of the ball game when they were threatening. To me, that's almost as complete a game so far out of the defense as you want to see.
Yeah, Pete, I think Jonathan Gannon's been a little bit unfairly maligned, at least coming off that Detroit game for sure, because like I said, there's just so many different players that are new to the system, and he's really figuring out how he's going to choose to deploy these guys, how they're going to fit in, and they also haven't played together for a complete game at that point. And I think now you're starting to see he knows exactly what he has. He knows what guys he wants where, how he views each game plan, and he's really able to maximize his personnel. And you have to give him credit. And also, looking back at week one, you have to give the Detroit Lions credit for executing, and you saw them be able to sort of follow that up with another strong offensive performance. So, I mean, maybe the Lions just aren't as bad as many thought going into the season. Now, I think that Jonathan Gannon, that was his best game as a defensive coordinator, and looking at the opponent that he was going against, I mean, that's a very encouraging sign for where his defense is headed moving forward. And I think that it leaves so much room for optimism as we move forward.
Yeah. So when you're watching this game and taking a look at the matchups, Andrew DiCecco, InsideTheBirds.com, football at 4, where's your big concern this week? What is the thing that this week you're wondering if Philadelphia will be able to handle this?
Well, if there is one area that I'm skeptical about, that I'm going to be really keying in on, it's the pass rush. I want to see them get home with more regularity. You like to see them some hits on Carson Wentz, force some things, get him off his spot, have him moving around a little bit, because as we've seen, get him on the move and things like that. When he starts pressing, that's where mistakes happen, and that's how the game really flips and turns on its axis. But if they're not able to get home, Mike, they have so many weapons that they can use and exploit. Doesn't matter how good you are in coverage, and as Mike can attest to, it doesn't matter. You can only cover for so long before a guy like a Jahan Dotson or a Curtis Samuel or a Logan Wilson is going to just Logan Thomas, is going to be able to break out and make some plays happen. I mean, that's what's really going to come down to. Can the pass rush get home with regularity and really force some turnovers?
Andrew, I know you were there Monday night, and obviously the atmosphere was electric. You're going down to Washington, and then this week you've got the buildup of Hurts, how he played. I mean, he's, I think, the third shortest odds now to win the MVP. You've got people looking around the league talking about Super Bowl, all that kind of stuff, and then you got this road division game. I think this will be very interesting to see how they respond this week to a situation where people are really starting to talk about this team more.
Yeah, they're in an interesting spot, and it's funny that we're looking at this just being week 3. There is a little bit of pressure on the Eagles because they're coming off such a dominant win, a convincing win against a team that many viewed as being a NFC upstart in the Minnesota Vikings, and now the Eagles are when the spotlight's on you and you're looked at as one of the better teams in football. You have all these different storylines, especially going to Washington, playing your former quarterback and Carson Wentz, of course. How are they going to respond? But being around, knowing what I know, just seeing the maturity and how they conduct themselves in these pressure-packed moments, I would bet on the Eagles all the time. 10 out of 10 times to get the job done. I think they're able to block out the noise. They're able to focus on the task at hand, and they're going to execute at a high level every time. And that starts with their head coach, Nick Sirianni, preaching the message, and there's the buy-in. And I really do think that they're going to be able to thrive off a crowd that might even be 50-50, Mike, believe it or not. And I think they're going to get this thing rolling and make another statement and keep going into Jacksonville at home on October 2nd.
He is Andrew DiCecco at DiCecco NFL. You can read more about the Birds and the Commanders. His preview and everything will be up over to InsideTheBirds.com. And, of course, he joins us for Football at 4 every Thursday right here on the Sports Bash. Andrew, appreciate it, bud.
You got it, man. Be good.